Good evening, everyone. Just before we start, I have an apology from, I'm afraid, from Jean, who was taken away for a family event. That's the bad news, but the good news, the two pieces of good news. One is that Anneloes is here, and the second is that I'm doing a podcast with Jean on Friday in the Imaginal Inspiration series, and so that will appear next week. And so watch the space. But this evening we're going to be talking about their joint books, two parts. I imagine they're working hard on the rest of it, the volume 3. Well, maybe we'll find out at least what volume 3 is called. And Anneloes is an extraordinary person who's a futurist, systems scientist, and award-winning pioneer of human development and systems change, which is exactly what we need, and the initiator and architect of the EARTHwise Constitution for a Planetary Civilization, and founder and CEO of EARTHwise Center. So before I go any further into your trilogy, Anneloes, maybe you'd like to tell us a bit more about your work and the EARTHwise Constitution and what you do generally at EARTHwise.
Thank you so much, and very nice to be here with so many amazing people from around the world. I love that. It's so nice that this is interactive. I'm already enjoying that. And indeed, Jean is sending her love, but due to family emergencies, she couldn't be here, but she's always here with us in spirit and in heart. So yes, you asked me the golden question. It's almost impossible for me to answer because I do so many different things that a lot of people go, well, how do you connect the dots? But to me, it's all related. And that is in a nutshell, it's really about supporting and developing the capacities for both the inner and the outer systemic changes that are necessary for this time, not just to go towards sustainable development, but much more important to create that civilizational shift and transformation that I believe is really at the crux of it all, to become a planetary conscious and mature species, and where we develop the capacity to be able to regenerate our Earth and to live in a far more compassionate and wiser way, hence the name EARTHwise Center. So my task within the EARTHwise Center as a CEO and a founder is also therefore to give direction to many of the different projects that we're having, whether it is in education or the new regenerative economics or new governance models or systems design, but also a lot of our coaching programs and our online courses. But the essence of it all comes down to, how do we become the future humans of an emerging planetary civilization, and work with the collapse dynamics and the tipping point dynamics of this time in order to get more creative and in order to really awaken the heart of our humanity and to learn through these difficult conditions, actually, about the essence of what it means to be human for this time.
Well, thank you. And before we get into some specific questions, I wanted to flag up to you, maybe you put this in the chat, Jerome, futurehumans.world, which is the site corresponding to the book, which is also linked, obviously, to EARTHwise. I'll just read this first paragraph here because I think it's very instructive. Future humans, for growing and developing our future human potentials and powers of the emerging new era. Through Future Humans, we bring together our hopes, visions, dreams, skills, passions, and expertise for the co-creation of a thriving and caring world. A world in which life is celebrated and we support each other to evolve more wisely and with greater care for the Earth as our common planetary home. Future Humans is hosted by the EARTHwise Center in collaboration with the Renaissance Project, and the Future Humans Trilogy, that the object of it is to support humanity through this critical time with essential perspectives, keys, tools, visions, codes, and practices. And I can tell you there are a lot of them. And it's based on radical new understandings that are emerging from the frontiers of a new paradigm in science and research the interface between science, spirituality, and very importantly, indigenous wisdom. And because what we're seeing is that a unitary conception of existence and the role of consciousness is emerging, and I very much agree with that. And then these sciences include quantum field theory, cosmology, new physics, complexity sciences, evolutionary system design, neuroscience, epigenetics, and consciousness research. So goodness, how do we get what's the Stargate portal? To start with, I think I'll just start with one question, because your vision is a consciousness science informed, but it's kind of human 2.W, if I can put it that way, as opposed to human 2.0, which is the future in terms of transhumanism. And I personally am very exercised by the momentum that there is towards transhumanism. And I think we need what I was reading in an article at the weekend, Michael Langan, we need a humanities singularity as opposed to a technological singularity. Maybe we'll start our conversation with your response to that general stream and theme.
Yes, and wow, thank you for adding all that further context. But I think it really starts with our understanding of future, and that for us, our understanding of future is not about a robotic version of a human, or a technocentric human, but it's to understand why we're using the words our future human potential is a very specific potential. So it's the potential of our next evolutionary step at a species level. So that's really from envisioning. So imagine that through this crisis, we actually become wiser people. And that out of that grows a kind of a planetary consciousness that is self-aware within the human experience. And this is therefore a human that is not just only thinking about kind of our own enlightenment journey, but really understands what it means, to be an expression of the earth and the cosmos simultaneously, being able to hold the personal individual perspective as well as the collective, and being in a process of emergence and deep transformation. So we're talking about the potential of that kind of consciousness and that kind of capacity, which really is the way you see that our evolutionary next step. Because if we don't, we are now faced even with the possibility of not just the extinction of so many species that we're causing, but also our own. So we really are in an existential crisis, and we're really being triggered and asked to evolve. Not just by technologies, but to evolve in our consciousness, in our comprehension, in our capacities,
and in our values,
in our
as well, in our
values,
priorities.
first and foremost. Exactly. And so it's that future human potential that already exists within us, just like an imaginal, cell. And once we start to engage that and activate that, and now embed and embody that, and hence also the EARTHwise Constitution for Planetary Civilization is about how do we constitutionalize that potential, rather than what we've been doing for hundreds, if not thousands of years, is to constitutionalize separation, duality, and division. So yes, that's what I mean. For me, when somebody says future, that is what I feel in my heart. This is
yes, and this is really the vision that we need to catch hold of. And you talk about the higher heart of humanity, but maybe a theme that we could look at and you could explain a bit further is you talk about the cosmic magnet and also about the cosmic compass.
That's right.
Perhaps you tell our listeners a bit about those ideas.
So I think you mean the cosmic compass rather than the magnet. But
well, there is a cosmic magnet that was referred to in the text.
It's the mirror. Yeah, we have the
cosmic mirror. Okay, right. Okay, yeah. Well, let's stick to the compass in that case. Yeah. Well, I think the magnet would be drawing from the future. I mean, there's this.
That's it.
It's very sort of Teilhard type idea, which there's a huge story, of course, behind Jean and Teilhard de Chardin, which I'm sure I'll ask her to tell in the podcast.
Exactly. So let's start with that cosmic mirror. So what you're referring to here are the 7 cosmic architect tools that feature in book 2, Return of the Avatars. And those are architect tools for being able to develop our future human powers, not just our potential, which gets kind of activated through the practices of book 1. But now in book 2, how do we develop those powers through the wisdom of the higher heart? Knowing that the higher heart serves as a kind of protection mechanism, that it's not the ego that's coming in and hijacking those increasing powers again for the wrong purposes. So with the cosmic mirror, one of those tools and in the practices that we work with is when you're looking in that cosmic mirror, it's using the mirror-like quality of our own essential wisdom of the luminosity of consciousness. And then you focus that with your intention to ask the mirror this from your mirror-like wisdom to capture what your future human potential is projecting towards you for this time. So it's a beautiful way to work with that for this cosmic mirror in meditation or in practices and imaginal processes, for being able to perceive and receive what's beyond the boundaries of our minds. And I think that's really important right now, because a lot of people, when we are feeling in fear and in stress, we can easily go into tunnel vision and not receiving anymore the guidance that is here for us also from this evolving consciousness and our evolutionary next step. So that is what the cosmic mirror is also all about, plus also asking to reveal to us, what are our own shadow areas that we need to be aware of. What are the areas within ourselves that need further care, further growth, and honesty and integrity. And then the cosmic compass is really working with the coordinates of this larger cosmic consciousness, and so that you have a constant in order to work with everything that's changing, to understand the deeper nature of change itself, again, from that evolutionary understanding that we don't just think change is random, or change is, when we're hearing change now, a lot of people feel overwhelmed, like, oh, what again, more change, yeah? But how to work with the nature of change in such a way that we direct it to activate the potentials that we want to bring into the world and become.
And just a sort of general point is that everything in our world, manifests from the inside out.
Exactly.
And so we have to remember what the causative power or causal power of thought and imagination. And so if we aren't actually imagining a positive new world, then we can't bring it about. And I think this is what you and Jean and many others have been doing through this sort of the architecture and the tools.
Yes.
Sorry, just to interrupt. There's the cosmic compass.
Yes.
Oh, great!
Exactly. You
points
got it.
in all directions. Which is great. And I think an important part of your message is the need for repatterning and restorying, and to arrive at a new story that we tell ourselves. Brian Swim's work is very much about this, and he's got a new book coming out, and we've got him on this platform, I think on the 11th of January. I was just having a look. So that's related to our imaginal power as well. So how do you see this new story that we need to tell ourselves?
Yes, well, where we make that kind of new storying and the new mythic codes and patterns quite concrete is through what we present in book 1 as the 5 future archetypes. And in fact, one of those archetypes is called the new paradigm storyteller. And the new paradigm storyteller is really how we are becoming the story of our metamorphic transformation. And one of the first kind of new narratives or new mythic codes is that rather than the old version of we no pain, no gain, as if we always have to grow through suffering, and this expectation that unless something really bad happens to humanity, nothing will change, which is so dominant in our stories, as well as the story that there's always a hero or a heroine. The new narratives that we've been working with and embedded through these 5 future archetypes is that you can evolve in a different way. Gentle strength, work with your future as an attractor, become responsive to the feedback of life so that it doesn't have to be so painful. Activate through joy, through beauty, through creativity. So it's different activation points, but also not the old hero heroine story as kind of the individuals that get worshipped, but much more the shift to the understanding of what's our collective capacity, our collective consciousness. And in this way, it also links up with a lot of the indigenous perspectives and wisdom.
And the group consciousness.
The group consciousness.
And the way the group consciousness can come together.
That's it.
And circles of wisdom
Yes.
that we need to.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that of course our current society doesn't prioritize wisdom at all, and that's one of the problems. That the E.F. Schumacher famously said that humanity is now too clever to survive without wisdom.
Yes.
So tell us a bit about how you created Rose's journey, because you started off rather dramatically with a near-death experience from acute COVID. Which would be quite rare for a young woman of her age, but that's kind of launches her into the inner space, doesn't it?
It really does. And when Jean and I started working on the first book, I was stuck in the Netherlands. I live normally in Mauritius with my children, and we'd just gone on to lockdown. I just visited my mother, who almost died from similar symptoms of COVID. It was the beginning of 2020. I was about to take my plane back to my children, and everything shut down. And I ended up being 7 months in the Netherlands and away from my children, all flights cancelled with no possibility to return. And around us, very young people were actually dying from those early onset of COVID symptoms, and especially those who had a Kawasaki pattern with that as well. So this was also the reality that we were seeing, around us. And because the story of the future humans, and hence the metamorphic transformation, is about how do we activate that future potential of our evolutionary next step in the middle of something that is also a world that's dying and collapsing. Yeah? Therefore, Rose's awakening to her future human potential happens within a near-death experience, because in a way we are also all collectively going through that huge rite of passage, which is like a near-death experience. It's a dying away of the old identities. It's a dying away of so many assumptions also that we have cultivated, and false models and systems that are unsustainable by design. Yeah? So Rose indeed starts off with these acute COVID symptoms, and when she becomes aware that, this is serious here, I might be dying, she says to the cosmos, this can't be it. I'm too young. I don't want to die. Whatever I need to do, please just guide me if there's a deeper wisdom there. And she had learned from her Icelandic grandmother, Verdandi, to, in those crisis situations, to reach out, to trust that there is a deeper wisdom that holds her. And in that moment, when she's going through that near-death experience, she hears the voice of Mother Cosmos, who guides her back into the cosmic womb. And shows her, Rose, the greatest power that you have is a higher order of choice. You can really choose to renew yourself and to renew your life and to re-enter also this life through your future human potential that belongs to a different cycle of time. It's not the future of the old cycle.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really important. It's the future of a new cycle. So you're re-entering then your life and this world through this new cycle. And therefore, it's like you are in it on a different vibration, in a different kind of coordinate, even to also then affect change. And that's how the story then starts. And she discovers then the cosmic keys, which are 9 very sacred perspectives of understanding the deeper cosmic architecture of consciousness itself, and how those are the building blocks that we need for being able not just to manifest that deeper unified reality, but also support the transformation of many of our societal systems.
And draw on that creativity, because
Exactly.
I mean, we're presented in a lot of media with sort of disaster scenarios about which there's very definite things that we're in a sense almost being conditioned to do and to expect, when in fact we need something completely left field, which is what you and Jean are proposing, which is taking the evolutionary process in hand from the perspective of divine love and wisdom in the future, and beauty, and caring and compassion, and actually everything that represents our true humanity.
That's it.
I mean, this is the world that we all yearn for.
Yes.
And yet the world that I'm afraid the military-industrial complex organized for us is completely the opposite end of the spectrum. And somehow we need to break through. I mean, there's a breakdown and breakthrough. Irvin talks a lot about that. And I regard our kind of groups, and the noetic sciences, and you and Jean and other people, and Anne Baring's on the call, we're the creative minority in Toynbee's sense in the study of history, where our regenerative ideas, the primacy of consciousness, the intrinsic order and beauty and ethic within the universe. This is the sort of true cosmology that we really need to understand and enact.
I fully agree with you. And this is right, and exactly, and later in the book as it unfolds, that is when then Rose starts to explore also the new paradigm science, and she wants to understand now what she's profoundly experienced, that profound unity during her near-death experience. She then wants to understand also, what does the new science tell about that, and how would we then apply that? And then in book 2, she also wants to, or has to, her grandmother for Dandy kind of confronts her with it. She has to then understand also, well, why haven't we then been creating a world based on love and wisdom? And what is this archetype of domination and division, and the politics and the gender and economics of domination and division all about? And how do we recognize that? Because what's important here in this journey as well is that it's not just about giving birth to that what we feel in our hearts most resonant with, and that we recognize, this is so true, but also having the courage and the capacity to stop and to undo what's harmful to that. And that requires also courage, and it requires this capacity to be able to confront that archetype and pattern of domination and division without becoming the next dominator. And that is also where it's going into the heart of that, what Rose is going through in depth in book 2.
Yes, that's that's very resonant. And I was just going to point out to people a book that just arrived yesterday, which is Science, Being and Becoming, by Paul Mills, and it's the spiritual lives of scientists, and it's very similar. And I'd just like to read a paragraph from it, because I think it feeds into our conversation rather nicely. So he has this mystical experience, and as a young man, and the consciousness communicated to me that humanity is unique in the universe, and that after further developing our consciousness, one day humanity will manifest something that has never before been manifested in our physical dimension. As it communicated this to my mind, I saw an image of the Earth from space, and while it spoke, within quotes, there emerged, spreading across the globe, a vast white goldish colored light that will one day be produced by a more evolved consciousness we call humanity. It was a beautiful and inspiring sight. What is it that will one day be manifested? Acknowledging what I consider my limited capacity to understand fully the vastness of that consciousness I encountered, what I understand will be manifested into the physical creation as love itself. Love, that force of and behind creation, is to come into physical existence itself. I think that's our common vision, isn't it?
This is it.
That's our common vision, and that's what these kind of conversations are about. And I'll just bring in at this point, my sort of spiritual guide is Peter Dunov, the Bulgarian sage, and he defined his role as the prophet of a culture of love, capital L. And he said that we were moving through. There's a famous prophecy that he made in 1944. So we're moving through a period of purgation and purification, where the old structures will disintegrate, and this will allow the new to come in. I mean, we have to have faith in a sense that this is the agenda. And I was reassured by Paul's vision of this. But on the other hand, at Beyond the Brain last weekend, we had Jules Evans saying that people had expected spiritual awakening, since at least the mid-19th century, and sort of widespread spiritual awakening hadn't yet arrived. So is it arriving in our time? What do you think?
Well, that's also the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, that's true. I mean, it's like the kingdom of heaven, isn't it? So the kingdom of heaven has arrived for those for whom it's arrived, but for those for whom it hasn't arrived, it hasn't arrived.
Exactly. Exactly. Because what I have found very interesting is that when you use that trust, as you're saying, when you see from trust, with that deep vision into time and into understanding in the process. So you touch then with your awareness, that potential of love in every human being. It's already there. So for me, has it arrived? But it's already there. It's just that,
well, it has arrived, is arriving,
it.
and hasn't yet arrived. And so it's like it depends on the knower, the beholder.
This is it. Exactly. So if you make it your reality that love is always here, it's always here. It's just that we're not always in touch with that. But to me, love is the power of manifestation. And it is that greater force that helps us to embrace even the most paradoxical situations that our mind can't grasp, And
well, yes, Dunov said that the sort of he had 4 levels of love, and the third and fourth level. The third level was love as a force in the mind, by which he meant that when people really stood in that presence of divine love as sacred mystical activists, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Thich Nhat Hanh, and what an extraordinary man he was, and others. You can Schweitzer, Dunov himself, and then the love as a principle in the spirit, which is the all reconciling principle. It reconciles all the opposites and transcends them. Yes. So it's quite a profound philosophy of love.
It is, but it misses, if I might add, one element, and that's also kind of in the focus, especially with our EARTHwise Constitution, is how to make that love embedded architecturally in the very systems, so that it's not person dependent. I think this, to me, is the greatest challenge. So for me, it would be about how can I see love in our governance structures, in our economic system, in our educational systems, in the very way that we design our buildings, so that it now the inner and the outer are truly coherent. I think that, to me, is the real task of our time, rather than are we seeing love present in action in enough people.
No, the inner becomes the outer.
Yes, that's it.
Yes, and I was also thinking of the Rianne Eisler's work. We had her on our platform a couple of years ago. The dominator and partnership models, and this is so important to understand. But the resistance of the old is very considerable, and that's where the power is. And so this is where we need both physical courage and something. I mean, I was hearing last night, a couple of nights ago, about the young people in Iran, and what's happening. 400 of them have been killed, and about 14,000 imprisoned. And we were listening to an Iranian woman friend who was telling us all about it, and giving some stories of people she actually knew. And that's the cost of change. It requires that degree of courage. I mean, it's staggering actually when you
It's staggering, and
inspiring.
perhaps that amount of violence that we're seeing is actually also testimony of the strength of love that is emerging.
Yes, absolutely, and the power of non-violence,
Yes.
which ultimately, I mean, the Whitehead said the instability of evil is the moral order of the world, which is quite interesting. And these patriarchal structures, they're hanging on literally like grim death,
exactly,
to this rising tide, which I'm sure is embodied in the younger generation.
Yes, that's right. And therefore it's so important that we see that love in them as well, so that they learn to recognize it and don't just think that love is an emotion, because this is such a common misunderstanding of people.
Gandhi said love is a cosmic force.
Exactly, the greatest force in the world.
That's I think we need a new we need a new understanding of this, but I think that's part of what our conversation's about. And then there's also the descent into the darkness, the unconscious, isn't there? The facing of the shadow, and we're seeing this writ large in all sorts of different contexts at the moment, and obviously this is both an individual and a collective, communal process. But it seems essential for what we're going through. Any further thoughts on that?
Yes, and this is where in both in book 1 and book 2 we introduce the element of the sacred darkness as well, because sometimes when we believe that darkness is evil or darkness is bad or darkness is just unconscious, then we're escaping in fake light. Everything bright, everything nice, thinking that we're so conscious, but rather it is the deep inner work and the deep awareness actually happens within that sacred darkness. And this is why we even have a practice in book 1 where Rose is using her imaginal powers if she wants to get that calmness and connect with the collective unconscious as a sacred portal into cosmic consciousness. And she goes under the water with her hat, and where all the outer sounds and outer informations fall away. And in that sacred darkness, she enters into that same beautiful space that happened through her near-death experience. And then she learns to really enter the deep unconscious, the collective unconscious, as a pure gateway into that cosmic guidance that doesn't get infiltrated by all of those projections and all of those egoic and narcissistic patterns. So I think that some of the best ways to become conscious of our shadow behaviors and help heal that is actually to befriend the sacred darkness, to go within that, and to allow yourself to seeing the descend into the chambers of your heart, descending into the womb space of creation, and allow that incredible wisdom to repattern you, rather than us always getting so busy and in the way of I have to change myself.
Yes, this receptive, but it's generative, isn't it? I mean, the darkness, you plant into the darkness, into the soil, in order for the generation, the growth to happen. I mean, like Goethe, we just have to look at nature to understand other things that are going on as well. And then before I bring in other voices, I just wanted your thoughts on what do you think we can learn from the Florentine Renaissance in our time? How does that speak to you?
Well, I think many people are rightly presencing this. This is a new Renaissance or a regenerative Renaissance, because what was a Renaissance for many people in Europe was a nightmare.
Yes. Well, that's more the kind of the globalization, colonization. That was the nightmare part of it. But I'm thinking about the return to the sacred texts and the translation of all the great Platonic works.
Yes, well, that in Europe, I mean, being part of that European tradition myself, and especially the Gnostic tradition, there's always there's a tradition that has always maintained not always being visible to other people. But in the sacred Gnostic texts and the Gnostic traditions also of initiation in Europe, that's actually a continual tradition. And
yes, you're right. You're
that
absolutely right. And I'm living
our
in the
books.
Cathar area. This is one of
Yes,
the Gnostic areas of
that's it.
Europe.
Exactly. And that's part of our heritage as well. So that's why some of those ceremonies also and codes are in the book in a coded way. Yeah.
Yes, Jerome, would you like to come in with a question at this point? Because here's a man who's read both books recently. He might like to come in with a comment or a question.
Thank you. I don't have a question readily to mind, but I mean, just an extraordinary scope and breadth. And the way you've put such a vast scope within Rose's story is astounding. I don't know if, I've got a just not like myself, but when I read something astounding, I generally turn over the corner of the book, the page, so I can go back to it. And there are a couple of times, I mean, several times where I read a sentence and I'm absolutely blown away, because I just think normally most people would have taken a whole paragraph to describe what you condense into a sentence. And the way you have a structure, and you have the exercises at the end of each chapter and the integration, it's just brilliantly done. So basically, I haven't really got a question.
Okay, well, he was an enlightened reader.
And I'm just the question is, when's the next one? When's the trilogy?
And what's its title? Or you're not going to give that away?
Well, the next one actually builds on the EARTHwise Constitution for Planetary Civilization that we just launched. And that is a real tool. So the compass that features in the book, in the Constitution, every single coordinate on that compass is an article in the Constitution. And so that's, yes, and I've made that freely available, the Constitution, for everyone. It's just our gift to the world. Everyone can work with it, everyone can adjust it. And we're now building a partnership alliance and a team of stewards. So this is where the real future humans, we are working in the world. And that's going to inspire book 3, because for Jane and I, it's very important that book 3 is even more applied, so that people can see in parallel that this is not fiction. We've put it in, we created fictional names and characters, but woven through that, are many real life situations and processes. So that's what the book 3 is all about now, really co-creating that future human world. And then on the basis also of the Constitution.
Well, I'll put you in touch with Nicholas Hager, who's written a world constitution about 10 years ago.
Yes.
On the basis of a restructured UN with democratic representation. And he's actually speaking on December the 7th about his latest book, The Fall of the West. So you might like to tune in to that.
I'd love that.
Can I bring up another theme, which I think is very, very important, is what you call thrivability, which other people might call flourishing. Can you say a few words about that? And then also, how do you think that we can persuade politicians to use that sort of measure rather than GNP? I mean, GNP and GDP is so outdated, and there is some progress. The late Hazel Henderson was working on this a lot.
Yes.
But it seems so out of date that we aren't being measured, as it were, by politically by thriving, flourishing happiness in the broadest sense.
Exactly. So first, about the word thrivability, you see it has two words combined, ability and thrive. Just like responsibility, the ability to respond. And how that's different from just flourishing. Flourishing is almost like it's a state in which you are. Sometimes it's seen as also as an outcome of a process. But with thrivability, it's also your capacity to thrive. And that's, sometimes we can use flourishing and thrivability together, But flourishing doesn't cover everything that we want to express to thrivability. So the ability to thrive is systemic. And it's not just about, am I feeling happy? Am I having everything in my life that I want? No, if you really understand that the ability to thrive depends also on the health of our planet, on the health of our biodiversity, on the way that we are collectively growing and developing in harmony with the evolutionary process of life. And then we understand, when that is the context, then also it reprioritizes, what do we need to protect? What do we need to preserve? What do we need to take care of? So that we can thrive, so that we can flourish, and understanding that that's always collective. You can't separate it or just emphasize one small group of people at the cost. That's what we're currently doing, right? At the cost of billions and the earth herself. So, and I think that's also that perspective and understanding needs to definitely be also in a new paradigm for politics.
Well, we had Thomas Legrand on our platform recently.
Yes.
You probably know him on the Politics of Being, which is a fantastic book.
Yes,
I mean that has all the necessary material in it. I think. I mean, Sir Albert Howard said in 1940 in his Agricultural Testament, he said the health of the soil, the plant, the animal, and the human is one, and that Zach Bush has got a program coming up, as you may know, on regeneration, particularly regenerative farming.
Yes.
And for me, regenerative is absolutely key, and sustainable is not actually, doesn't cut it. It's what everybody's talking about. But we know that if we help nature regenerate and heal, the fisheries would be another example, then it happens.
Exactly.
But at the moment, our systems, particularly our agriculture, is set up against nature and manipulating nature, as opposed to what Victor Schauberger said. You should understand nature and copy it. Kapieren und kopieren. And that's where we've become disconnected. And I think the indigenous people find it quite astounding that we don't understand that.
I agree. Yes, and added to regeneration, also generativity. So the regeneration is there's a word "re" in it, right? But have you got even further than restoring something to its previous state, make it even better? And this is why, indeed, to me, the vision or even the word sustainability and sustainable development, it doesn't have that appeal for the transformations that is necessary, because it's still focused on how to minimize harm, whereas the focus on regeneration and thrivability is maximum goodness. Yeah.
Well, there's a story in Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, which I'll just tell briefly, because it's such a good one. So there's a young scientist wanting to go, you may know the story, a young scientist wants to go to a conference on sustainability. And so she has to make the case to the elders. And so the elders ask her, well, what is sustainability? And so she gives a kind of standard definition. And the elder reflects for a moment. He said, well, it just sounds like they're looking for ways they can carry on taking. In other words, there's no reciprocity in the process of giving back and giving and receiving, taking and giving and taking. And that seems to me, again, completely fundamental. I mean, the soil, again, is a good example of that. You can't keep taking from the soil. You have to give back to it, and otherwise it just, all the life disappears, as many other people have argued, including Merlin Sheldrake.
That's right. I mean, soil itself is an entire ecosystem. That is, healthy soil means that there are so many different organisms collaborating and working together. So there's, in that perspective, there isn't even such a thing as soil that you package, you put it in a bag and then you put it in your garden. No, soil.
No,
soil
I mean,
right?
correct me if I'm wrong, Jerome. Is it Marina O'Connell, this new book on regenerative food systems?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I've just read it, and it's extraordinary. I've reviewed it for the next issue of our journal. And I think if you want to have one book on regenerative food systems, this is it. And it's illustrated, all the sort of different approaches, agroforestry, organic, biodynamics, which in fact was the first one, even though if you go back a generation before that, everything was organic,
Yes.
as we would now see it. So I think that's a wonderful book.
And just picking up on the sort of the soil element and digging, I was wondering if you could say something about the pour that started the whole trilogy. Unfortunately, Jean's not here.
Oh, yes. Such a lovely story.
And whether that relates to the dog that David met earlier, I don't know. Perhaps you can share something about that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yes, Jean and I had been in contact for a few years before that, and then we kind of lost touch because our email was so overloaded. So I had written to her several times because I'd had a very strong dream that if we would put our minds together, it would create a kind of meta mind structure that would allow for something very new to come through. And that dream was such a strong vision, in fact, that it just came in a flash like that. It lasted for maybe 5 minutes in the night. I thought, I have to reach out to her again. And it hadn't yet happened. And it said, to the universe, look, I've sent Gina so many emails, haven't heard anything back. You take care of it. You want this to happen? You take care of it. And I had sent her before for my PhD research an article called Attracting Our Future into Being, which is working with some of this new quantum physics and cosmology and thrivability and systems change. And so she had printed out, so my email must have reached her because she had printed out that article, forgotten about it, had fallen off her desk and had ended up under the carpet. And then one day in February 2020, her dog started pawing away, seeing this little corner of this piece of paper under the carpet pawing away. And she went to her dog and said, "What's that?" She pulls up this paper. There's my article, starts reading it. And she went, "I have to phone Anneloes. We have to work together." So I thought, okay, Cosmos, of course it takes a dog to get Jean's attention, yeah? Because everyone who knows Jean knows that she says always she feels more dogs than human. So she absolutely loves dogs and thinks that the brightest species. So it's just so wonderful. So we're saying it's the dog that brought us together.
Yeah,
well, we had dogs online last week, and there's probably some dogs online tonight. Madame de Stael famously said, "The more I know of men, the more I prefer dogs."
So I have another question too about Olaf and the game. So that extraordinary way, again, perhaps you could describe how Rose asked him to imagine the game and how to engage him, and whether it's going to become a reality or is it stay away?
Yes. Now, Olaf is modeled after my youngest son, Manu. So the questions that Rose and Olaf are exploring are real questions that I've been working with through my son. Yeah? So the Cosmic Compass game and the Future Humans game. And Manu, he's always fascinated with games. So I would actually ask him, in real life, even with the Cosmic Naval Cord. There's an amazing story that when he was so much kind of in this whole story, Manu and now, he would start getting ideas that I was writing about without him knowing that. So, for example, when we were working on another game feature, and he comes from school and he says, "Mom, look, I've woven this bracelet for you. With 3 strings. Would you like it? Do you want a yellow one or a blue one?" And I had just written that day about the Cosmic Naval Cord in 3 strands. So I was like, this is incredible. And I said, okay, that's amazing, Manu. Now imagine that what you just woven is a Cosmic Naval Cord to help reset your connection with Mother Earth, Mother Universe, and Mother Cosmos. And if you were to be able to pull on that naval cord and work with that, what would happen for you? And then, as he describes that, I've included that also in the book. So many of those questions that Rose and all of us started to explore. How do we gamify some of those challenges? And for them, the challenge was really about how do we as humans radically shift how we play the game of life on planet Earth. And the biggest game task here was how do we awaken the giants, the sleeping giants that we are asleep within. So yeah, a lot of his beautiful wisdom. He is 12 years old. Is all there through Olaf. And yes, we very much want to make this a real game. But we will need a good team of game developers and people who can help us also build, the technology, because especially the avatar interface that is within the game. It's an interface that you could actually be working, creating that through biofeedback systems that helps you now to become aware of all the information of feedback loops that are always there, but that most people are not aware of because our mind is so disconnected from that. So if you're going back now, for example, just imagine a politician actually having this biofeedback avatar interface and now starting to get feedback information about the greater realities of life. How would that inform our experiences? So through the Future Humans game, the Cosmic Compass game, the purpose of that was as well, what are the experiences that we need to shift into that then inform and catalyze this deeper understanding of what a unified reality of life is all about? What it means to be living from wholeness. Because if we don't experience it, if it's only intellectual, we're not going to care for it.
No, very true. I mean, how do you see what you might call, Mr. George used to say, that George Trevelyan also did, the movement, and we used to have a round table, and they have all the organizations once a year where we could all find out what we were doing and how we could collaborate, because I think we do need a movement of some kind, and obviously it would involve bringing a lot of organizations together around some central principles, I suppose. I mean, I've tried to do something like this. I was in the Chartres community in Chartres in August, and I wrote at the end of it, I wrote a call for a revolution of love. And it's actually it's in the current Paradigm Explorer for anybody who hasn't managed to have a look at it. And it's something like that. We need something that people can get behind, and which people can enact and actualize in ordinary life as well at their community and neighbor level. Otherwise, we could be sort of muddling along without sufficient clarity to bring about a transformation.
I agree, and that's also one of the reasons why we launched the EARTHwise Constitution for Planetary Civilization, as a way of creating and helping those movements, but also really in support of movement building practices through a shared vision, common living systems principles, because the whole foundation of that is to biomimic the evolutionary capacities and cosmomimic as well of healthy living systems, of thrivable living systems, and kind of using the living systems narrative so that we can also go with it to people who, may not be comfortable with a language of unity or love, so that it can be kind of broader and more inclusive. But of course, at the foundation of that is love. And that through these shared principles and agreements and a vision, that we also start to cohere the pattern of collaboration itself. Because what I'm seeing is there's so many amazing projects and initiatives, so many brilliant people doing incredible work. But we need to become aware of each other and really focus on what can we do together that none of us can do alone. And to help kind of mature that pattern, I think that's really important, so that we kind of link up fields of coherencies into a greater super coherence, so that it can then become a tipping point.
Yes, I mean, traditionally, the way that people shift things is by getting out in the street, and we've seen this in a number of different contexts. But that's a bit of a managed process, and the British government's trying to shut this, the right to protest down. It's going completely in the wrong direction. But I think people need to feel strongly and feel they have a vision, and as I say, something to get behind. And so maybe we need something very, very simple that people could say, yes, I support that, and I can do my bit.
Yes, and well, for me, that starts. What I found a very easy way to start is yourself as a future ancestor of this emerging planetary civilization, if you already stand in that perspective of I'm a future ancestor, so what world am I an ancestor for? You are immediately kind of standing in that ground of unity, of life. So starting just there and understanding that this emerging civilization, because I see it is an emerging civilization, this planetary civilization. This isn't the civilization of the Greeks or the Romans or this or that. This is a civilization of being an Earth citizen. And we all
no, and that so much that's Irvin Laszlo's vision. And
yes.
I had a conversation this week, which is very encouraging, because it seems like the next generation of very wealthy people are turning now into the inner life and realizing that true wealth is within, rather than the most expensive whatever it is they can buy. And that seems to me to be a rather a critical shift, because these are people who are hugely influential, and they can help make things happen by supporting them. So I think that's a space to watch.
Yes, and I hope that they also follow up in the action to help catalyze the necessary
this
funding.
particular project, I can tell you more about it.
Yes.
It's already on the ground, and it's going to go international. And it's very regenerative. You'll be glad to hear.
Yes.
And local. So
yes.
Anyway, we can speak further about that. I think we've come to the end of our hour, which I've enjoyed very much. We haven't had many questions from the audience. I'm
looking forward to reading the chat, because I think that's
the chat. Yes, I mean, but there hadn't really been a few comments, and
yes.
but there's nothing that I've been able to take up as a question, and nobody's put their hand up either, which is very unusual for our talkative group.
Well, maybe you can still. I see someone there, Sheila.
Oh, Sheila, right. Well, Sheila, you better make it reasonably short, because we're now into injury time.
Okay. I know that Jean has written about embryology in the past, embryogenesis, and I'm hearing you're using cosmic navel cord. How much focus are you giving on the ontological wisdom that we already have in us, that perform us and that we perform through in your writing and in your new ideas about how to be a future ancestor?
Well, very much through the practices. So the practices are always about awakening and accessing latent capacities, as well as extending those through large evolutionary capacities within nature itself. So to kind of going beyond of only thinking about our own potential, but how is your potential supported and informed by an incredible evolutionary process? So that is very much part of that, and the very process of the 5 future archetypes and the 5 steps and stages of moving from potential to actualization biomimics how life itself brings itself forth. So it's I think it's really a center of all of that. Yes. Very good question.
How do I get a hold of you, Anneloes? Can you put a contact in the chat?
Yes. I'll do that. I'll put
But everybody's now waking up and wanting to ask questions, and we're into injury time. And this better be the last one, William. Thank you, Sheila. You're muted.
There we go. Am I unmuted now?
Yep, you are.
Wonderful to hear this conversation, both of you. And but you made a reference at one moment to a new paradigm of science.
Yes.
And it was left hanging. And so give me another phrase or two, because I've been spending my lifetime on that as well.
I'm going to do better than the phrase. I'm going to, if I can still in the time, giving you now the link. So what we have done is we have summarized those core key insights from a new paradigm in science, which is in the last chapter also, or the last part of the Quest of Rose, but we summarized it into a blog article here. So here you can go, really through bullet points. But of course, the first foundations is to have and that comes from the understanding the informational dynamics of how does our universe come into existence, grow, develop, and evolve. And then to understand that if we're looking at it from an informational perspective, then we're seeing that it is actually unified and its nature is holographic. And that the way it scales is through fractal patterns. And that is radically different from the Newtonian kind of old paradigm, mechanistic paradigm, where the perception is that that we're living in a universe of separate parts and particles held together to immutable mechanical laws. And what we're seeing now more and more is that's not true at all. And I think that the latest Nobel Peace Prize that was awarded also, when these brilliant physicists also proved this quantum entanglement principle and how the universe is locally, what they said, not real, but that statement is often misunderstood, but non-locally, it is very real, but we have to understand non-local consciousness. Therefore, as that deeper, unified reality underlying existence itself, and that how that new understanding of this informational architecture of the universe also helps create the foundations for the primacy of consciousness. So how that helps to help this bridge, that consciousness is not something that just emerges out of a stage of complexity of evolutionary systems or of matter, but that consciousness itself is really the ground reality. And then that shifts then the question to how does consciousness enable the formation of local, individuated, self-aware experiences, rather than trying to figure out how unity comes out of, individual.
From the bottom up.
That's
quite right. I think
Thank you.
I think more and more people are moving in this direction, but we haven't got to a critical mass. But there's lots of work to carry on doing.
Oh yes.
So thank you very much indeed, Anneloes. Where are you in Holland at the moment, or are you in Mauritius?
That's right. At the moment, I'm in the Netherlands. Yes.
Okay. Right.
Hence my sweater. Otherwise,
yes, absolutely.
I'll be wearing a t-shirt now.
Yes. No. Very good. Well, it's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you.
So wonderful.
And I will definitely be inviting you on Imaginal Inspirations as well in the new year.
I'd love that.
And in the meantime, as I say, with Jean, I will ask Jean the story, which he's told hundreds of times.
Yes.
But in Imaginal Inspirations, when I interview her on Friday,
Yes.
and then so you'll be able to listen to that next week. Gail asked that question in particular. So thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed it. It looks like you did. And I will be in touch to advertise the next book briefing shortly. So see some of you tomorrow evening. We've got Dave Pruitt also on Teilhard, in fact. So there'll be some more interesting discussion to be had. So good night, everyone, or have a good day if you're on the other side of the pond.